All right, let's talk about a 50-year mortgage. There's been a lot of discussion from people saying that this is a horrible idea and it's the worst idea ever, and this should never even be considered because it's so much interest that someone's going to have to pay. I believe a lot of people looking at it this way because they have this nice, cozy home that they've been in for quite a while. They've probably got a 30-year mortgage with an interest rate of 3, sometimes less. And so to consider doing that, like a 50-year mortgage, that makes no sense at all to them. But that's only from their perspective. The reason that a 50-year mortgage, or at least a 40-year mortgage, is something that should be considered is because owning a home has become completely impossible for the vast majority of Americans, especially younger Americans. The implications of this are far-reaching. For example, I have a good friend who does not want to have children until they are more established and in a better place. And the first time home buyer used to be 31 years old, now it's 38. It's just becoming less and less affordable to start a family and own a house. Owning a house is a huge part of that. Putting down roots, having a home, having neighbors, having these things. It's a huge part of what starts family life. And people are finding it to be completely unattainable. And he's not alone. I know numerous people that are that way. So for the people who think it's just a horrible idea to introduce a 40 or 50-year mortgage, and they have tons of equity in their home and an incredibly low interest rate, they just can't look at things from their perspective. They are completely ignorant of what they are ignorant of. So if you purchase a home in 2020, just to talk about the math of this, if you purchased a home in 2020 and you only paid interest, meaning you paid nothing towards the principal at all, the equity in your home would have gone up about 45% since 2020. On an average price home, that means just buying the house and only paying interest, you would have acquired $160,000 in equity. Now then, if you had rented a home and you continued to rent that home for the same amount of time, and if your rent was adjusted annually based on national trend, your rent would have gone up 35% in that time frame. That means your rent would have gone from $1,185 a month, the average home, the average property, that's what it rents for, apartment, home, whatever, would have gone from $1,185 a month to $1,650. Now, unfortunately, there are a lot of people in this country who live paycheck to paycheck, and they have a lot of debt. And so if something breaks in the home that you've bought, like an air conditioner, or you got a roof leak or something, obviously you could have some unexpected repair costs, which can put you in a bind. And so that is something to consider. But something else to consider is if you're a renter and you're on a 1-year lease and your landlord turns on the news and sees, oh, rents are up 8% this year, 10% this year, they might kick you out after a year. They might find a new tenant who's willing to sign another year lease and jack up your rent. All of these things are possible. I mean, you might have that air conditioner expense if your air conditioner breaks if you own a house, but then again, you might be dealing with moving expenses and the inconvenience and the money that it costs to move just because your landlord decides to kick you out. What if your landlord decided to kick you out to sell the house because home prices have gone up dramatically? All these things happen, okay? Equity in your home is the primary driver of net worth for most Americans. And when a home's equity is excluded from the net worth of that family's net worth drops by 2/3 for the average American family. So 2/3 of an American family's net worth on average is their home's equity. This is especially true with the bottom 50% of all families with their net worth. As real estate agents, we've seen this time and time again where somebody passes away and the biggest thing that their family inherits is a house that they've paid off, which has gone up over time. It's a piece of property. So the average American homeowner has an estimated equity of over $200,000 today, with a total aggregate value in the United States of $35.8 trillion. Meanwhile, the average American has about $8,000 in an emergency fund and a savings balance of $62,000. For families that are achieving the American dream, owning a home is the primary driver of that for a whole lot of them. Looking at stats like these, it's pretty obvious that owning a home, even if you aren't paying down a ton of principal, you are getting the appreciation of the value of the home. It's a huge path to retirement and leaving something for your family. There have only been a couple of times throughout history where housing prices have gone down, one being the Great Depression, the other one being the Great Recession, or housing crisis as it's known. These are the only times in history that housing prices have gone down. Every other time, housing prices have steadily climbed. To draw a parallel here, there was a great article that somebody wrote that basically said, what if you were the worst investor in history? And they called this guy Bob. So the article talks about Bob and how Bob invested $6,000 in the S&P 500 1 month before the stock market crashed 48%. Now, this is a real event that happened in history. Bob was dejected and decided not to invest any more money. All he did was leave his money invested for the next 15 years. So then in 1987, he developed the nerve to invest another $46,000. And the following month, Black Monday happened and the stock markets go down another 34%. So you're noticing a trend here. He invests money, and the moment that he does, the stock market crashes. Bob then leaves all the money he has invested, but he doesn't take it out. He just leaves it. In 1999, he decides to make another $68,000 investment. But once again, the dot-com boom. The stock market loses 49% of its value. One more time. In 2007, he decides to invest a lot of money. Right before the Great Recession, crashes the stock market and crashes markets globally, losing him another 52%. So every time he invests a big chunk of money, half of it's gone, just because he's the worst investor in history. Bob just has the worst timing. At the age of 65, he finally decides to pull all of his money out of the stock market. He invested a total of $184,000, and his total of investment had climbed to $1.1 million, despite the fact that he is the worst investor in history. And the reason why, it's like Warren Buffett says, it's not timing the market, it's time in the market. Just owning and appreciating asset, even if you bought it at the worst possible time, over time, you're going to be okay. You're going to come out better. Similarly to that, if you bought the average price house in 1981, when interest rates were 16+%, so the average price house was $69,000. If you bought a house at the worst possible time, 16% interest rates, and you paid the minimum payment over 30 years, you would have paid $320,000 in total payments, and that house would be worth $415,000 today. Meaning you bought at the worst time for interest rates. Because we're talking about interest here. We're talking about the amount of interest people pay. If you bought at the worst possible time for interest rates and you never refinanced, you never got a lower rate, and you only paid the minimum, which means you made the maximum possible amount of interest payments, you would have made $100,000. But if you refinanced, like any sane person would do, if you refinance just 5 years later to a 10% interest rate, now you would only pay $210,000 in payments, meaning you would have $200,000 in equity. Once again, it's not timing the market, it's just time in the market. The point in all this is if you're going to be living in a particular place for at least 7 or 8 years, it almost always makes sense to buy a home as long as you can afford to. Now, if you have a very mobile family and your job has you moving nonstop a lot, paying a huge commission to sell your house, probably not a good idea if you're only going to be in it a year. Given a year, any micro movements in the market or local movements in the market could change this analysis of what makes sense, but that's why we exist. We only charge people 1% to sell houses. You'll save a lot of money in commissions if you use us. Either way, problem is home ownership has become completely unaffordable for a whole lot of people, and that has dire implications for the country. All you need to do is look at places like Europe to understand the social unrest that takes place when people feel like they cannot own a home and they cannot start a family. Things like this have lasting problems. When people cannot own a home and they cannot achieve any sort of financial stability, they won't start a family. And the implications of this become generational and sometimes can bring down a country simply because people will not do the most basic thing, which is find somebody, fall in love, get married, and start a family. The number one reason cited why people don't start families is the high cost of raising children and the inability to afford and provide for a family. Due to this, people are having children much later in life or not at all. The replacement rate for a population is 2.1 children for every female, for every woman, so for every family in most cases. That means in order for population not to decline, every mom needs to have 2.1 kids. Once families start having 1.3 or less kids, societies begin to collapse generationally because there is no labor force, which means the aging population does not get supported by the younger population. Healthcare costs skyrocket, labor costs skyrocket, schools close. Countries can no longer sustain themselves, their militaries, their anything, because there's simply not enough kids. There is no replacement of the population. Many people believe, this is something, feel free to Google, once you go down to the point where you're at a 1.3% fertility rate, it's called the total fertility rate, if you want to Google this. Once a country gets down to 1.3, it's almost impossible to recover. The average fertility rate across the European Union is 1.38%. South Korea is at 0.7. In the United States, it's 1.62, meaning our population is shrinking, okay? And it's directly tied to affordability and the ability to start a family financially. When countries go through this sort of population decline, it's bad. A recent study found that rising housing costs were responsible for 51% of the U.S. fertility decline. And housing affordability was determined to be the primary determinant for people starting families and having kids or not. I can't stress this enough. Homeownership is literally the foundation of society. So basically, if people can't afford to start a family, or if they wait to start a family much later in life, they'll have fewer children, or they won't have children at all. I went to dinner with a bunch of college friends and their friends not that long ago. I noticed that of the 6 girls sitting at the table, 5 girls, 3 of them didn't have kids, and they were in their 40s. I mean, it's just it. If we don't replace the population, the cost of everything, healthcare costs, labor costs. Healthcare costs go through the roof because now the average age of the population continues to climb, and you can't offset that with younger people. Social Security fails because there's no longer enough young people to pay into it, and there's more and more old people taking out of it. This introduces more financial instability. So financial instability and insecurity at the level of young people, which prevents them from having kids and starting families, creates financial instability for the entire country generationally. This is how societies collapse. But it doesn't happen immediately. It's like a frog in a boiling pot. Doesn't realize it until it's too late. It is not a stretch to say that we have a major affordability problem, specifically with housing. And a strong case can be made that as goes housing, goes the country. One of the reasons why we do what we do at 1% List is because we feel like we have an obligation to our clients to save them money if we can. We feel like it's a debt we owe to them. We feel like we should. Not we could. We feel like we should, especially if you can be equally, or in the case of many, a lot more profitable just by offering people a better deal and doing more business. I did a podcast episode recently which showed that housing prices have outpaced inflation by 300% since the 1970s. In that same time, this is how real estate agents get paid, is by the price of a house. And the price of the house has outpaced the value of a dollar inflating by 300%. In that same time frame, real estate agents have gone from paying their brokers 50% splits, meaning your brokers take half the money, down to 10% or less splits. Resisting giving your clients a break when it comes to your fees is another huge part of this affordability problem. It's simply too expensive. So, is a 50-year mortgage the only answer for this problem? Probably not. Is it the best answer? I think you could argue yes, but I don't know. I'm willing to listen to other options. But it's definitely not the worst answer. The worst answer is to do nothing. So if you are comfortable in a 30-year mortgage with an interest rate that's incredibly low and you have tons of equity, you probably don't have a realistic view of the world through the eyes of a 20-year-old who hopes to get married or who is recently married. These are people that are trying to get a foothold in the world so that they can start a family. And the success of our country depends on them being able to do so. Thank you for listening.